I think there's a plot here. The plot is of several members in this wonderful sanctuary who try to say to me, be angry, not young man, but be angry, old man. Yes, one can be very angry, and mainly because it's all or was also avoidable, what we have done. And whether it is America or Europe, we just have misbehaved. You in the administration, maybe a little bit more than we, but together we have a collective guilt, no question about it. I liked very much this introduction with the pictures. But you must do one change, and that is not diplomacy that speaks here, but something else. As a friend of the United States, it hurts me when I see a reference to the cruelty of the United States. The United States is not cruel. I say it as a German also. I was telling one of the congressional aides, and I'm very grateful that they have found the time to come, as I'm grateful to see, well, of course, to see Reverend Moe again. I've been here before, to see Dick Blakely, who has graciously carted me around this morning and before. I'm very happy to see my sister, Jerry. I keep saying in my family always Gary, and my American wife, who's from Bremerton, for 43 years we have been married, she keeps saying Gary is a man's name, not a woman's name, so Jerry is her name. I said, okay, Jerry is her name. Jerry, thank you for your friendship, and Bob for yours. And Bob Haynes, Dr. Haynes, is one of those who whispered into my ear, I should be angry. So, yeah, well, you will see how angry I am. I'm also happy, by the way, I have my note here, Abdi Sami, where is he? Yes, it's nice that you have come again, and it makes me feel comfortable. It won't be an easy sailing for the next 40 minutes, I guarantee you that, because the story isn't so nice. But it has to be said over and over again, because it must be fixed in our hard disk. We cannot just look forward. In Europe, politicians are saying these days a lot, yes, I'm sorry. I also have to recognize Bert Sachs. Where is he? Yes, Bert. Sorry that it must be you hear in Europe a lot, we must look forward. Our politicians, our chancellors will say, Mrs. Merkel, let's look forward. I say to that, yes, we must look forward, but we have the responsibility also to look backwards. We cannot just forget what has happened. And I think political accountability demands that we look back. And responsibility, civic responsibility, demands that we challenge all those who say, let's forget. And it mustn't happen that, as in history so often it happened, that we say justice and law is just for those who lost, the losers, the weak. No. Justice is for the dictator Saddam Hussein as much as it is for those who are today in power who have pursued a tragically wrong policy. I think that must be acceptable. I belong to a generation of Germans who don't have to feel guilty. I had nothing to do with the Second World War. I was only a victim of that Second World War. And therefore, I must approach this period in my history, my country's history, with a lot of understanding. I must not forget. I must learn from it. And I think that's the way to approach it. But the main thing is that culpability, wherever it occurs, cannot just be ignored. And if there have been Nuremberg trials, and there have been Baghdad trials, the first top echelon of the Iraqi leadership is no longer in this world. They have been executed. They have been punished, very severely punished. Well, if there was a Nuremberg trial and there was a Baghdad trial, am I really too aggressive when I say, why can't there be a London and a Washington trial? I think we owe it, you and many of us who have lived there or gone there, who understand the situation, who are astute to the reality there, we must have the courage to look backwards. And we must look forward with a sense of responsibility for that difficult process of national reconciliation and national reconstruction. But let me for another little moment look backwards and ask you, how much can a nation take? 30 years of a severe dictatorship, 2 wars. The first war lasted 8 years, from 1980 to 1988. The second was shorter, in 1991. 13 years of cruel sanctions, the international contribution to Iraqi suffering, then an illegal invasion, and since then 5 years of occupation. How can a nation, individuals in that nation, how can they take, how much can one take? So the Iraqis have suffered a lot. And the Iraqis, it's like a red thread, continue to suffer. And the only difference is between the time that the sanctions ended in 2003 and an illegal invasion started, that their immune system is even weaker than it was. As a nation, as a collective entity of 24, 25 million people, one doesn't know how many Iraqis there are, because there was no census, hasn't been a census for the since 1997, so for the last 11 years. Let's assume 25, 26, you see higher figures. Iraqis are there and are suffering and haven't seen, 2 generations of Iraqis haven't seen peace, haven't seen normalcy, haven't seen tranquility, haven't seen what our children and we have had the benefit to enjoy, and that is to look at flowers and not suspect that there is somewhere a mine that we have to watch about, to sit somewhere and eat a full meal. Well, Iraqis have rarely had that opportunity. Even now, I'm in continuous contact with Iraq, and not just with Baghdad. So I know, for example, my good driver who became a friend, whose son is now in Bosnia in an English-speaking school studying with a scholarship. I've spoken to his father just a few days ago, and he said, yeah, we now have 2 to 3 hours of electricity per day. When I lived in Baghdad, we had 5, 6, 7 hours of electricity. So what has changed? Everything is just one notch worse, with the worst thing that didn't exist. This is not a defense of a dictatorship. What didn't exist was the insecurity. And therefore, there's a new factor in the lives of practically all Iraqis. And I would just like to talk now what I really came here to talk about, and that is, as hard as it is to speak about elements that could be part of a peace process, of a peace plan. Plan is too ambitious. This is not a plan we have. We have just a few bricks of what could become a house a peace building, a construct for peace, a plan, very ambitious. And I say it with discomfort because the time seems so different to talk about peace when this last March, this last month of March, just under 1,000 Iraqis lost their lives in 1 month. That is a surge. That is a real surge, different from the other surge that General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker advocate this week in Washington. And it was also in March that for the fourth, that's difficult for me as a German, the TH, 4,000th soldier who lost his life, the GI who lost his life in this unnecessary confrontation. So it is a very inopportune, it seems, atmosphere in which to talk about peace, but we have to do that. I said to you, we must look backwards. Accountability is important. Justice must prevail with due process, of course with due process. But we must now have the courage here in this room, but also elsewhere, to begin to think about what needs to be done to introduce a discussion, a debate about normalcy, a return to normalcy, healing, peace. And I warn you, though, when you start doing that, there will be Iraqis immediately who will say, leave that to us. It's our country. So we have to approach that also with some humility. We are the support group. We are not the leader. The leader is where the carnage took place, where the injustices took place, where generations were deprived of an opportunity to lead a life as it is suggested in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, an article which says every human being, whether in this room or in Bolivia or in India or in Iraq, every human being has the right for the full development of the human personality. That is what Article 26 of the Universal Declaration states, and it is such an important article. And this morning, when I went to Bellevue Community College and I walked through these beautiful facilities, walked through the library, walked through their facilities where they have the computers, where I saw a huge cafeteria where people sat and enjoyed a coffee or whatever. I thought, there is the chance to develop your personality, to learn in peace. In Iraq, that is not possible. Many people today will not even send their children to school because they are afraid that something may happen somewhere. Well, that is all deplorable and adds to the urgency with which we have to begin to think with humility about how we can make our contribution to a resolution to peace. And the peace plan that you find in this website, transnational.org, on which I worked with my 6 other board members in the Swedish organization in Lund since August last year, is a beginning of a debate to which all of you, everyone, can contribute. You can look at that and you can feed back. In fact, it would be fantastic if we hear from you with your thoughts, what one can do to make this a better plan. And by no means are we the first who have started to think. And it is in the best United States tradition that yet again you show a leadership. Because those who have begun to think about a peace plan mostly come from here. It's Mr. Kucinich, it's George McGovern, it's Dr. Polk, who assisted George McGovern. There are others who have voiced their their thoughts on the subject. It was Save the Children UK and US who in 1993 already, in 2003 already started talking about a peace plan. But that assumed that there would be quickly a return to security in Iraq, which never happened. So this Save the Children plan is slightly unrealistic. But there are later thoughts, including the ones that I will present to you now, about a peace plan. The motives for all this may differ, but the ultimate objective of all these proposals that are now coming up are the same: peace, normalcy, the ability to carry out national reconstruction. I venture to say that Iraq probably today is the largest museum of garbage that you can find anywhere in the world. I've not seen any country that is as littered with dangerous ordnance, unexploded ordnance, depleted uranium, military vehicles that are destroyed, all over the country, from north to south. It was already when Saddam Hussein was still in power. It is now much, much worse, and it's dangerous because the extent to which suddenly leukemia, for example, in southern Iraq is mushrooming as a result of the ammunition that came into the country, like depleted uranium, is incredible. So there is a great urgency that you begin a cleanup, that you begin to plant again. Someone said very cruelly, and it will hurt you, and I know that. He said, "My family over generations have cared for our palm trees as if they were members of our family. And then came an American tank and just plowed them over. For every palm tree that we lose, we will kill 7 American soldiers." What a terrible thing to say. But this is the reality. It's a cruel attempt to survive and to revenge. So national reconstruction is a lot more than physical reconstruction. There has to be a healing process, and that will involve, and that's part of what we are trying to argue, it is a peace proposal with Iraq and in Iraq. So it's two layers that are involved here. And one thing that we, of course, argue, and that all these proposals for peace have in common is, number one is the withdrawal of foreign troops, the closure of bases, and the sending home of the many, many mercenaries that are serving in Iraq. If I would leave it at that and say no more, then I think I would do injustice to the issue, because the troops are there. We cannot just take the easy way out and say, withdraw and forget. No, that isn't possible. We have not to make a case for a continued occupation, of course not. But we have to make a case for a withdrawal, and concurrently all kinds of corollary efforts have to take place. And I want to talk a little bit about some of these. The first thing that comes to my mind, or came to our mind, is that sovereignty, real sovereignty, has to be returned to Iraq, including oil sovereignty. And you know, I think in every nation, in every culture, dignity is an important concept. But in the Middle East, it's a very, very important concept. I'm teaching at the University of Marburg, which is an older German university. I have a Palestinian student in my seminar, and he failed the first time around. His German wasn't so good, his English wasn't so good. I'm teaching in English, but there is some German involved also. And he then asked me whether he could repeat that the seminar the following year. And I said, yes, you can. And he came and participated, contributed better. And then one day, and this was late last year, he came up and he took all the courage and he said to me, do you think I can speak tomorrow to the seminar and to you all? Because I have something to tell you, something about Arab values. I said, of course, 10 minutes, 15, take your time. So the next morning he came and he in very humble way, he said, you know, for us Palestinians, and that I think by extension goes to other parts of Iraq also, important to us are three basic concepts: the horse, the sword, and the olive tree. The sword standing for power, for strength. The horse for elegance, for endurance, for beauty. And the olive tree, and in Iraq I guess it would be the date, the palm tree, symbolizes our roots, where we are from, our soil. And anyone who misunderstands the importance of these concepts in our tradition, in our culture, cannot possibly understand us. Well, that made an important point to me, that whatever we do, we have to be more sensitive, I think, as Westerners, to the priorities, to the things that other people consider important. You may have had here, I don't know, but there is this well-known Filipino activist called Walden Bello. Walden Bello said in Frankfurt at a meeting where Johann Galtung and others, and I was there also, he said, you people from the West, sometimes let us do the things that we want to do and the way we want to do them. Don't always interfere. And that struck a note with me, because I think that is so correct. We have a tendency, when someone does something wrong, that you must get involved, that we must get involved. And it would be one thing if we would talk from a high and justified high moral ground. But when we are frail in our own ways of doing things, if we have so many cruel pieces of evidence that we have not completely, far from being able to follow what we have in our books, what we have in our constitutions, what we have in our ethos, the gap between that which we pretend to have and what we actually have, there is such a wide gap. What gives us then this feeling of moral superiority? And I sound now like a lay preacher. I don't want to sound this way, but it's something we have to remember. Otherwise, you know, this travel, I keep saying often, this traveling on a one-way street, the Western one-way street, sometime not too far away, I think, maybe in the distance one can already see the end of the road. We cannot continue that. And therefore, in a long-winded way, I'm telling you something about recognizing the right of Iraq for sovereignty, including that important aspect of oil sovereignty. It wasn't all about oil. The Iraq invasion, the treatment of Iraq wasn't all and only as one single reason because of oil. It's much more complex, but oil has a lot to do with it. Also, Iraq must, as part of this process of regaining sovereignty, all these changes. Here in Seattle, I listened to his speech, but in Germany, Paul Bremer came here to Seattle, and he spoke. And the way he spoke, I had the feeling he hadn't realized the damage that he had done by changing the laws, changing the administration, introducing an ethnic factor into appointments into the way the country was to be run according to carefully distributed posts according to Shia, Kurdish, and Sunni numbers. No, the damage there was enormous, plus the fact it violated the Hague Convention. It violated international law. You are not supposed to, an occupying power is not supposed to change the fundamental structure of a society, and that is exactly what happened. That has to change. And it is either malicious, or it is ignorant, or it is a combination of both when there are public figures suggesting maybe the solution is a soft partitioning. The soft partitioning of Iraq, Senator Biden, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, or Peter Galbraith, Ambassador Galbraith, both have made references to this, have proposed this. The US Senate has, in fact, even adopted a resolution to this, that this would be an option. It cannot be an option, and it must be excluded from any attempt to bring normalcy and maybe our contribution to peace to Iraq. It's foolish, it's dangerous, and the damage already has been done in Iraq, because now the confrontation between the different religious groups has gained a weight of its own, and that is a tragedy, an absolute tragedy, and to untangle that will take quite a while. As somebody in Victoria, where I attended a conference of Middle East scholars from the US and Canada, and a few from Europe and from Iraq, one Iraqi said, Saddam Hussein constituted the steel band around a very beautiful pot. And that beautiful pot now is broken. And how do you fix it? Well, I cannot give you an answer. But one thing is we have to be sensitive to the history, to the traditions of Iraq, if we want to make a contribution to normalcy and to peace. Now, ideally, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations should play an important role. But the United Nations is so impotent at the moment. There is no proper role. The 55 men and women that serve in Iraq at the moment in the Green Zone can do no more but sit on their chairs as tight as they can, because if they get up and go out, their life is in danger. So they sit. They don't move out, except in exceptional circumstances. The UN, that was not what the UN was created for. The United Nations was created to be the instrument for conflict resolution. But the UN has been really misused. As Mr. Rumsfeld openly stated, it's like a toolbox. The mission determines the composition. Who participates in what? No, that's not how it should be. But the fact remains, in theory, the United Nations should play an important role. In practice, the United Nations cannot play a role. As an American diplomat some time ago, rightly, absolutely rightly, she said, the big problem in the Middle East today is there is no trust. There is no trust. People don't trust in each other anymore, because we have had double talk, we have all so often been cheated, and we have ourselves cheated. But under a retooled and a restructured approach, the United Nations can and should play, and that's one of the points we have, should play a role in bringing a peacekeeping force, in providing maybe a buffer between the different factions that will be at each other as a result of this invasion. That is unfortunately the reality, that they will be at each other unless we provide a way of keeping them gently apart until they have found a niche for each other again. So the UN has a role, the UN must have a role, And all that, as the troops move out, these kind of issues must come in. Whether it is the United Nations or the Arab League or the Organization for Islamic Countries, some international bona fide institution must fill the vacuum. And along with that, a whole range of other things. Debt cancellation, repayment of debt. At the moment, in the books of Iraq, is something in the order of $400 billion of debt. Secretary of State, former Secretary of State Baker, James Baker, did the commendable job of going around and pressuring countries to give up their debts or give up the credits that Iraq had, the debts. So he managed to reduce Iraq's debt burden by $145 billion, quite a sizable amount. But this has to continue. And one has to look at the dubious and the good debts, the bona fide debts, the acceptable debts that Iraq should repay, and forget about the dubious. And there is, my guess is that the overwhelming number of dollars that are in the books as debt are of a dubious nature. Forget about them, and that's part of the deal that is evolving. And then compensation. I spoke this morning for a while about the fact that Iraq had invaded illegally Kuwait in 1990, was punished for that, and part of the punishment was compensation. They were forced to pay compensation. Well, the Iraqis now ask and say, well, if we had to pay compensation for invading Kuwait, we now want to have compensation because you invaded us. I think that's not unreasonable, and that process, that should be part of a peace process, because without that, there will be a big problem left, and the Iraqis, as one Iraqi once, not long ago, said to me, the problem with us Iraqis is that we are Iraqis. We are stubborn, we are individualistic, they have good memories, and they will insist that some compensation payments are going to be made. But compensation, how can a mother and a father be compensated for a child that they lost in the invasion or in the aftermath? Or how can a son or a daughter forget that their mother or their father was blown to pieces in the market? So the compensation to a large extent has symbolic value. It cannot make up for lives lost, for family structures destroyed. We heard from Reverend Mo earlier about the large numbers of Iraqis that live outside of Iraq today. Well, if you think that they live as harmonious families in different places, you are wrong. Here is half a family, here is a father, here is maybe a mother with her children. They have been torn apart. You cannot compensate for what they have gone through, what they have lost, but one can make a point, one can undo a little bit the humiliation that they have to face. And then we want to make, and I hope that you're comfortable with this, we want to argue, and no others haven't done that, we want to argue that the Middle East should be what was decided in international resolutions in the General Assembly and the UN Security Council as early as 1974, and again repeated in 1991, and that is that the Middle East should be a zone free of weapons of mass destruction. That is easy for me to say, and it is very difficult to succeed in, because we have such imbalances in the distribution of lethal weapons. I don't need to go into details, but you know there's at least one nuclear power in the Middle East, that is Israel. There is another aspiring, maybe, I'm speculating, we have no evidence, but some think they have. Iran is on the way to becoming a nuclear power. Well, whatever it is, nobody should have these weapons, and we should take the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and the Non-Proliferation Treaty seriously without a double standard. It is absolutely... And by that I mean, isn't it amazing that we can open a newspaper where you read an article about Iran and how dangerous Iran is, and in the same page or on the next page you read about, happily, without any hesitation, about the development of a new generation of nuclear weapons, the mini nukes and whatever, paid for by taxpayers' money in our so-called Western democracies. That cannot possibly be acceptable. And so I want to stress that we consider this as very important, and people will chuckle and smile and say, well, you can go ahead with your blue-eyed proposal for a Middle East zone free of weapons of mass destruction. Well, we will. And we will be, to use a crude expression, we'll be bloody-minded about it. Because that's the only way, I think, in which one can maybe make some progress here in this very difficult area. Then there is the example of South Africa and Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Yes, that is quite impressive, but it's not comparable to the Middle East. Middle East is certainly not to Iraq. A different situation in Iraq. But the idea is a good one. We don't have to take a cookie cutter and take the same example, South Africa, and say that is what one should promote in Iraq. But truth and reconciliation between factions that were forced to box with each other in a very limited ring inside Iraq and between the outside and Iraq, I think it's fair to make such a demand, and that should be a very fundamental piece of a peace process that one could negotiate in earnest. I want to say that it's not only us. George McGovern and Polk have made proposals in that direction, and there are others who have done the same. I think your Democratic candidate Obama has also spoken about the importance of giving diplomacy a chance. He talked about the surge in US diplomacy with Iraq and the region. And to quote him, I like that very much, at every stage we have suffered because of our disdain for diplomacy. Well, that needs to be reversed. We must do what Eleanor Roosevelt and others, founders of the United Nations, have repeatedly stressed, and that is the UN and international institutions are there to solve conflicts, not to create these conflicts. So our concern must be in this context, and I know that there is sensitivity in this country for that, concern for those Iraqis who cooperated with the armed forces of your country. They are under special threat, so one has to give them special concern. One has to help them. One has to help those who are now living in terrible conditions, as you, Jerry, and you have seen in Syria and in Amman, and I've seen also in Egypt. Very miserable condition. One has to help in repatriation. One has to help in refugee education until they are able to come home. And we believe that, very strongly believe, that governments cannot make good what they have done wrong. People have to come in. There has to be a people-to-people cooperation. And you are so good at that. I think you are so good at that. And we haven't forgotten this. Wherever there was a conflict and Americans came in with their big heart. I cannot forget 3 or 4 years ago in Munich, I made a statement about Iraq and sanctions. And the next day, by coincidence, I went to a bookstore and I saw an elderly lady coming towards me, and she said to me, "I went to your speech last night and I liked what you said, but I was disappointed that you did not stress the good-heartedness of the Americans at the end of the Second World War." You see, that's how some people, they have not forgotten. They appreciate this. And when we talk in the peace process for Iraq about people-to-people cooperation, this comes in again. That is a strength of North America. You are better at that than we are. We are too withdrawn. It's maybe shyness, maybe not. It's maybe a live and let live kind of thing. But you are much more easily involving yourself, many of you, in helping others, and I hope that you can play the role that the international community would expect from you in this people-to-people cooperation, which is going to be so necessary to reassure the Iraqis that they have friends out there that don't have a hidden agenda. The Iraqis nowadays, they don't know. You are nice to me. Well, why? What is your motive? Why are you nice to me? Well, we have to reassure them that maybe we are only nice because we want to be nice. There's nothing we want to gain from that, except to say to us we have that responsibility. And I think that is maybe for us as a civic organization one of the more important points in the plan. I'm almost done here, and you have so much patience in listening to me. I'm very glad to nobody has gotten up and run out and protested, or worse, I said to the students this morning, they enjoyed that, I said, throw tomatoes at me if you like. Nobody, either you didn't bring any tomatoes or you don't want to throw them, but you can throw them later. But I wanted to say, if I had been here 20 years ago, I could have discussed with you a Palestinian conflict, a conflict between Lebanon and Israel. I could have discussed with you the Iraq situation that was beginning to get precarious. One could separately talk about these conflicts. Today you cannot do that anymore. Everything is related with everything else. We cannot, when we talk about Hezbollah and Lebanon, it has links to the Palestinian issue. It has links to Iran. It has certainly links with Iraq. So it's an integrated macro conflict, if you want. And therefore, we cannot forget one when we talk about the other. And that also means I honestly could not understand how the world could accept Annapolis as an idea for peace. That was a joke, but it was a bad joke. It was not a good joke. You cannot, in a war college, bring people together that you handpick, or as you would say in America, cherry pick. This one, but not this one. If you want peace in the Middle East, if you understand that things are interrelated in the Middle East, then you cannot close your eyes to the fact that there is a reality called Hamas, that there is a reality called Hezbollah, there's a reality called PKK, there's a reality called Iraqi resistance, there's a reality called Syrian government, and there's a reality called Iranian government. They all have to sit on that table, virtually or in reality. And when you begin to have that mindset, I think you have set the first stage towards a more successful resolution of peace. Instead of what? Well, thank you, but instead of the $60 billion bribe doesn't help us. To tell Sunni governments, and my Iraqi friends don't like that when I talk about Sunni countries. They want to talk about Arab countries, but not about Sunni countries. But you know what I mean. If you offer $60 billion to Israel and Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries, to rearm, to get more arms, Is that a contribution to a solution of a conflict in the Middle East? No. It's a build-up for confrontation with Iran. And that cannot be the approach that we... And the sooner we understand this, and I mean we, because it isn't just you, it's increasingly also, after Mr. Chirac was retired and Mr. Sarkozy came, and Mrs. Merkel, who has, as a German chancellor, in her bones still the fear of the big bad enemy in the East, the Russians, and she tended to also take the line that is taken in Washington, and in Europe now there's a saying, Mrs. Merkel, the German chancellor, is Mr. Bush's ambassador to Europe. That's what one hears. So there are these, unfortunately, these developments too, but this is not, absolutely not, a step in the right direction. Just as it isn't to try and bribe countries to become members of NATO, to bring NATO to the doorsteps of Russia. That is only intensifying what already, ladies and gentlemen, is happening. That's a fact. It's not speculation. New alliances are mushrooming. There's something called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Consists of such odd bedfellows as Russia and China, who are suddenly cooperating, have discovered each other, the importance of cooperating. China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, India as associate members, Central Asian countries having joined together as a new alliance. And I keep saying, in these days when one talks so much about the subprime developments in the US and elsewhere, well, it's going to get pretty much worse if we are not more conflict resolution minded, if we are not willing, as you have heard me say several times, references to the double standard. If we are asking in Europe and in North America that other countries should open their borders to our goods, and we close our borders to their goods, as we have done in Europe to some extent, we cannot expect that they accept this. This is why the Doha trade round failed. And it failed not because of the EU or because of the US or Canada or Japan. It failed because of Brazil, India, and South Africa, who said no, nothing doing. That double standard we no longer accept. The point I'm trying to make, more and more alliances against what we stand for are coming up because the Western one-way street is no longer the preferred highway on which to travel. And that, I think, has to be very clearly understood. And therefore, we have to have, coming back to the Middle East, I'm almost finished, comprehensive settlement has to be accepted, and that means all these different, and to us maybe disagreeable players have to sit on that table. And then we can begin to negotiate what is undoubtedly a very, very rocky road for a long time to come. Someone in Europe has made the proposal, there is this Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, to have an OSCE for the Middle East. It's worth trying, I think, because that would be the comprehensive approach for the region, including Iraq, and would do what Mr. Kucinich, for example, refers to as a security and stabilization force that could be deployed under those auspices. Well, I think I just, at the end, I want to simply say that we have to become more humble. What was his name? Kennan. Kennan, you're very very well appreciated diplomat in Europe. He reminded people over and over again of the importance of a powerful country to be humble and to be more globally minded, not to stick exclusively to our own values. I've said in this room, I remember it before, you can eat rice with your fingers, with a fork and knife, and with chopsticks, and it all goes down in the same direction. So we have to understand that. the things are relative, and we must respect others for the way they are. I end by simply saying, quoting to you a very beautiful African saying, a wisdom from a troubled country, from Kenya. But here it is. If we want to walk fast, we will walk alone. If we want to walk far, we will walk together. So let's walk together. Thank you.